Evening. My name is Joseph Gerson, and I'm with the Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security. This evening, I'm privileged to welcome you and to thank you for joining our webinar with its anything but short, though very descriptive title, Trump Drives Canada into European Arms, Economic, Military, and Cultural Ramifications of Trump's futile and nationally self-destructive campaign to annex Canada. All there in one very long title. As I begin, in addition to thanking this evening's speaker, I also want to thank Mariana Fernandez, a dedicated friend and volunteer who has been anchoring our Zoom technology for our webinars. Attention is focused on Trump being flagrantly and illegally bought and sold by Arabian monarchs. Within the last 24-hour news cycle, the media has turned away from his racist campaign of kidnapping and deporting brown and black refugees, his MAGA assaults on food stamps and medical care here, and now that kowtowing to Saudi Arabia's mega-rich dictatorial monarch is well underway. Trump's shattering of what remained of the traditional West has become old news. Needless to say, that is having devastating consequences that will reverberate over generations. Those of us living south of the Canadian border have little or no experiential knowledge or understanding of the magnitude or ramifications of Canada rejecting the new Trumpian America and what that will mean for our respective futures. During a recent meeting of the International Peace Bureau's International Council, I was struck by the passion and details of Stephen's brief report on how Trump's threats to bring Canada to its knees in order to more completely dominate and annex our northern neighbor have backfired, and how Canada is recoiling from its traditional U.S. ally and turning to Europe. Stephen is vice president of the International Peace Bureau, and a Nobel Peace Prize recipient organization. He is a policy analyst and founder of the Ottawa-based Rideau Institute on International Affairs, and has been on the forefront of the Canadian peace movement since the 1990s. He is currently National Director of Policy and Advocacy for the Canadian Health Coalition. He writes a weekly Peace Quest column for Substack, and in the margins of his time, he's also DJ Stevie Kicks. So those of you in Canada or elsewhere can turn in to listen to his programs. Before turning our virtual floor over to him, I want to give a few words about the format and logistics. After his talk, we will turn to questions and answers. In order to pose a question, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And we ask that you do not use that space for comments or debate, as that will limit my ability to see and ask your thoughtful questions. Okay, Stephen, take it away. It's all yours.
Thanks, Joseph. Thanks, everyone, for joining. It's really a privilege, and I've been a long-time fan of all the awesome webinars that you've been putting on. And of course, we've known each other for 30 years now, I think, going back to the 90s. So it's great to talk to you again, even virtually. And the topic today, I think, couldn't be more pertinent. Certainly not the topic that I would have thought we would ever be talking about, Joseph. Is your president's designs to annex Canada. I mean, that would not be on my top list of topics, but it is something that is very top of mind here in Canada. I know you in the US have a number of issues that you need to deal with, and you described very well the kind of shocking, horrifying, really, developments that are happening there. Not the least of which are the reordering of the global trade arrangements that Trump has put in place with these global tariffs. Some of the greatest impacts are being felt here just north of the 49th parallel in Canada, because our economies are so intertwined, and it's been a decade process of interconnecting and integrating our two economies. It's almost like trying to unscramble an omelet that's going on, and it cannot be done very neatly. But I'll talk a little bit about how we got here, what does this mean, and what are the implications are going forward. And I really look forward to the discussion afterwards. I mean, let me begin by saying, Canadians consider themselves very close to the United States. I have a whole branch of my family in the United States. My childhood memories are loading up in the back of my dad's car and driving on March break down to Florida with my other relatives. And this would be something that is very common. And even on a very micro level, so much of our population in Canada is right along the border. Day trip shopping in the US is very common. In fact, some people live in Canada and work in the US. And so we think of the healthcare industry in the Detroit, Windsor area in particular. There's a constant flow of people moving back and forth. And in fact, it's one of the largest, most valuable trade group goes across the border of anywhere in the world. And you might think of sometimes Canadians are basically Americans with public health care, and that's really that's really the major difference is we watch the same movies, we eat the same food, we drive the same cars, we play the same sports. And I'll just say go Leafs tonight because the hockey Stanley Cup finals are going on. We share this massive, massive unmilitarized border, which is really unprecedented pretty much anywhere in the world. It's such a unique place. And just by virtue of our geography and our shared history, both coming from the same colonial parent, that being the United Kingdom or Great Britain at the time, but yet back in the 18th century, we chose slightly different paths. Some wanted to go for independence in the 13 colonies. Those who didn't came to Canada, which was British North America at the time. And really that was really this kind of first establishment of Canada in a larger way, along with the former French colony in Quebec, French speaking, that really set up these two great countries that share continental North America. So you can imagine, the shock when President Trump started targeting Canada. I mean, it was really surprising. I was trying to think of an analogy. It can only be akin to like your lifelong friend, and the two of you go to a party, and suddenly that friend stands up in front of everybody and says, "You're the worst rotten SOB that he's ever met," and everybody should shun you. I mean, the shock is just, it's difficult to describe. And I don't know how you come back from something like that, how that relationship can be ever repaired. And it really has awoken, I think, in Canada, a sense of difference, a sense of defensiveness that we never had to really consider before. And in an odd way, some people might be somewhat grateful a little bit in that we have long said that we should be more proud of Canadian nationalism, the unique contributions, our unique institutions that we've managed to build in our relatively short lifespan of, since 1867, it was a pretty young country, and which had been largely forgotten for many years. And it is now, Joseph, on a huge resurgence, the sense of nationalism in Canada, in a positive way. Most parts of the world, nationalism is not a positive thing, but in Canada, traditionally, Canadian nationalism has been very left-wing because of our generally more right-leaning neighbor to the south. So it was tied up with a sense of independence and our own future, and it was very progressive in terms of our social programs, our different ways of doing things, our different kind of approach to values and the international community. So it really has been a shock, and let me explain just a little bit of some of the more immediate impacts that have been felt. I mean, and it's at multiple levels. I mean, certainly in the backdrop of all this is these annexation comments that's coming from the president that when he first made the joke and called our prime minister the governor of Canada, admittedly kind of funny, and it was just sort of taken as a joke back at a meeting in Mar-a-Lago with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at the time, and nobody really thought he was serious about it. And then he kind of said it again. And then he said it a third and fourth time and started talking about erasing the border between Canada and the United States and how much lower our taxes would be and how improved our healthcare would be. And along with that, how terribly done by the United States has been from Canada, how cheated and all of this kind of discussion. It was kind of went from sort of a joke to something that was really shocking. This was a real change for us. Of course, we are always following U.S. politics in Canada. It's beamed directly into we watch U.S. cable stations, we watch the same TV stations, and up until then, our hearts have gone out to the people in the U.S. We watch the election closely, and with Trump, it's basically we just turn on into MSNBC and break out the popcorn and just kind of watch the Trump drama unfold, knowing that we were never really impacted directly by it. But that's no longer the case. With the imposition of these tariffs, which is an attempt to disconnect the deep integration of our two economies that has happened over the last 10 years. It's a massive problem for Canada. There's some estimates out there of 1 million jobs are at risk, and we're a population of about the size of California, so we're about 45 million people. So you think of Canada as sort of a California of the North. Even politically, we're maybe a little similar to California as well, too. We would probably vote the same way. But massive problems. And then on top of that, we're looking at shifts in the auto sector in particular. Now, we have tariffs on steel, we have tariffs on aluminum, and others could be coming, but the automotive sector is really getting hit badly. We're now seeing plants invest billions of dollars in investment being put on hold in new auto plants. Honda announced last week $15 billion is now on hold. We're seeing shifts being sent home from plants that build. These are U.S. owned companies that are building cars in Canada, and I got to point out that these parts come from all over the place. Apparently, when a Canadian assembled car goes into the U.S., 50% of that car was built in the U.S. already. The parts go back and forth across the border seamlessly until the final. So we send parts south, we bring parts up. It's almost like there is no border when it comes to that. So massive dislocation in terms of jobs there. And then there's just these stories, Joseph, that keep coming up. Canadians traveling in the States being asked, taken aside by border guards, their phones seized, demanding passwords to review the social media, being taken into a room and asked, which country do you like better, the United States or Canada, which has resulted in a huge stand down. The border trips of Canadians going to the United States has dropped by a third in just a year. Airlines shutting down routes. Photos of March break in Orlando at Disneyland with Disney World and Disneyland with empty because of so many Canadians used to go there. Mass sell-off of properties that the Canadians winter in the United States being sold off. To the point now that this has dramatically impacted the most recent election. It is now being felt politically in Canada. The political system is responding in a way that we just came through an election. We thought the ballot question was going to be about taxes and domestic issues about that, and climate policies and whatnot. And the Conservative Party was way ahead. They were a shoo-in to defeat the governing Liberals. But then with Trump's intervention, totally changed the ballot question to who is best to deal with the United States and the Trump administration. The sitting incumbent Liberal Party had brought in a new leader. He was a banker. He is a banker, was seen as much better at dealing with Trump because the other guy was seen as far too close to this type of Republican movement that we've seen in the US, and we have a nascent one here in Canada as well, which is no surprise. So such a huge impact that it actually flipped the election. The Liberals have come in now again with a new leader. So much that Trump, when our prime minister went down to visit Trump after the election, Trump joked and said, "Well, congratulations on your election, Prime Minister Carney. I think I had something to do with that." True story, and I think he did. Now we're on a new political agenda of disintegrating ourselves in the United States. The new prime minister has said it's not going to be the same. No matter what happens, it's not going to be the same. The deeper integration project is over. We are now looking at dealing everything in terms of preserving jobs and investment in the economy here in Canada. We're looking for new trading partners now because we can't guarantee, despite free trade agreements that we have with the United States, just seem to go kapoof. We're now looking for other areas. And I know we want to talk about this a little bit later. The military is now coming up. So it's gone beyond just a commercial relationship. We also have a very deep military and security relationship with the United States. The two really have gone hand in hand. That is beginning to unwind as well. Canada is looking for new military alliances. They're looking to Europe now. And of course, what goes along with that is the military industries. And of course, the war in Ukraine runs a line right through it, and we could talk about that as well. So I guess I'll just say that these are very precarious times. I think people on both sides of the border, I know that there's millions and millions of people are feeling the same way as we are about concern about the direction of this is going. In fact, people around the world are looking with great concern about where American leadership is heading, and how do we deal with this problem, and is there ever any way, to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, just to draw on another metaphor. I'm not sure, and a real unclarity about what the future is to hold. So I hope that maybe some folks watching and listening have some comments or ideas and perspectives on what is the best way forward for a friendship between our two countries that is really under stress right now. I don't know if it's broken, but it's really under stress. And what does this mean internationally as well?
Thank you, Stephen. Let me unmute myself here. Very helpful and obviously disturbing overview. I'll start with a few questions, and let me ask listeners, if you have questions, to please put them into the Q&A box at the bottom and center of your screen. I guess maybe just at a personal level, could you maybe say something about how this shock and separation have affected people that you know and work with, just at a kind of a personal level?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, we never really had concern about crossing the border, and what might happen. Are we going to end up in a detention room? We've heard of Canadians who were in the U.S., who were on contracts there, who had permits, needed to get them extended, being thrown in detention cells for up to a week. And these stories are broadcast widely. My son plays organized sports. He plays ultimate. It's kind of like a frisbee football type thing. And he plays at the university. And the league crosses the border. Canadian teams play with American teams all the time. I'm now concerned about him going across the border and what he might have on his phone, that kind of thing. My girlfriend works for an American company. Many Canadians work for American companies, but she's here in Canada. What does that mean? She's often going down to the United States for meetings with her own employees and people like that. What might that mean for her? And of course, for our relatives in the States, we are having family celebrations here in the States. My American cousin is now worried that if she comes into Canada, will she be able to get back home? I don't know if that's valid or not, but this is the kind of thinking that's happening. And of course, I'm greatly concerned. I have, our movement for peace and global justice is a global movement. And of course, I've worked with you and many other wonderful Americans, never really thought of much different. We've all been united in a common cause and belief. And I worry that this is going to make those relationships harder to maintain going forward.
Thank you. I mean, certainly at the economic level, there's just deep concerns, and it goes both ways, right? I mean, today's New York Times, or today's, what day is this? Um, Yesterday's New York Times has an article about how U.S. markets, how markets in the U.S. rely on goods from Canada, and certainly the automotive that you were describing, but there's energy relations, there's lumber, which is going to drive up the cost of already high housing here. There's deep integration in terms of agriculture, especially with fertilizers coming from Canada, and we're uh, you know one of the things that's sort of just remarkable to me is how Trump is undermining his own base with the job loss and economic loss that comes. I mean, one of the questions that's been raised, obviously, Rachel Maddow did it recently, is whether we'll even have an election in 2026. Trump is certainly attempting to rule in a way that leads people to begin to wonder about that. You made reference to military and strategic issues. I think many people here don't know about NORAD. They don't know about the increased strategic importance of the Arctic Ocean and U.S.-Canadian cooperation and militarization in the region. Could you say something about that?
Sure. I mean, Canada and the United States have a very unique defense relationship, probably unlike any other defense relationship that the United States has with any other partner. I mean, the Canadian military has basically kind of three core missions, or three priorities. One is the defense of Canada. Number two is the defense of North America. And that means working very closely with the US military in terms of creating a secure continental defense. And the third is contributions to the international security order. So some people might think of Canadian peacekeeping, the image of the Canada wearing the blue beret, and our former prime minister winning the Nobel Prize for somewhat inventing peacekeeping. But actually, defense of North America is far more important in the military world than these international missions are. And so, how does that play out? Well, we fought together in the Second World War, and we were all part of the establishment of NATO. Canada was a founding member of that. The United Nations as well. But also at that time period was an important binational command called NORAD. So the it's basically, I won't spell it out, but it basically was built when the threat of Soviet bombers coming over the north was top of mind. And so NORAD was designed to set up early warning radar systems all across the Arctic in order to watch for Russian bombers at the time that would presumably be able to come over the north on their way to bomb American cities. And we had fighter squadrons that at one point were armed with US nuclear weapons in order to go up and intercept bombers somewhere over the Arctic and blow them up in nuclear explosions in the air to try to knock them out before they came in. So we were an early warning first layer of defense. So NORAD, we fed the data into NORAD, and down in Cheyenne Mountain in the U.S. There's two commanders. There's a U.S. commander and there's a Canadian commander of NORAD. And in fact, on the day of 9/11, as the story goes, the Canadian was running NORAD at the time of 9/11 when the planes hit the World Trade Center and all the defenses needed to be scrambled. That's how tight the integration was. Of course, when missiles were developed, intercontinental missiles were developed, different technology was required. The U.S. developed satellite technology that could also monitor for U.S. launches. But the early warning radar system is still there, and in fact, Canada's just committed billions of dollars to upgrade it to look for new threats like cruise missiles and things like that. So it's all about a perimeter defense relationship. And really, nowhere else does the United States have a relationship with another partner. I mean, there are things like the Five Eyes, which is an intelligence sharing network. Canada is one of the trusted partners in that, in part of the Five Eyes. But so much of our military equipment is deeply integrated with the U.S. For instance, it used to be, I'm not sure if it's still the case, but at one time, the Canadian Navy was one of the only navies that could fully integrate into a U.S. carrier group. You know, because you've got the aircraft carrier, and you might have half a dozen or more ships around it providing protection, maybe some submarines underneath. But a Canadian frigate could move in, take the place of a U.S. ship, and it would be totally seamless. That was the kind of level of integration that our military was looking at. Top of mind now, the F-35 fighter aircraft. Huge political problem in Canada, the cost, the technology around purchase of the F-35. But yet Canada has agreed to buy the F-35 as part of our ongoing military relationship. It would be used as part of NORAD. These data systems are directly linked, very tightly linked together. And now, with the recent shenanigans that have been going on, the Canadian government has issued a review of that purchase. And in fact, because they're suspected that Trump can actually exercise a kill switch on the planes, that we're so tightly integrated with US technology that the plane can be effectively disabled, and which compromises our own sovereignty and independence. So the level of security that we have developed, the integration between the two. I should mention that the United States does have Northern Command, which is also responsible for North America, but these happen side by side. They're not integrated together. NORAD has Canada, the US, but NORAD also falls under US Northern Command, which runs, for instance, the ballistic missile system, which Canada, quite famously, did not join a number of years ago when Reagan and then later Trump, or Bush too, later brought it in. Canada did not join it, but we still remain very tightly integrated into this defense of North America.
Thank you. So I'll do one more question, then I'll turn to the questions that are beginning to accumulate in the Q&A box, and others are encouraged to put your question there. So with this change, and as I heard you speaking in the IPB meeting, it seems that Canadian leadership, its elite, and maybe its people as well, are looking to more deeply integrate with Europe, with the ongoing militarization, upgrading of militarization that has followed Trump's shenanigans, we'll call them, and in terms of trade agreements. And on top of that, there's also the question of China. Lula of Brazil just went to Beijing and basically talked about their irrevocable collaboration going into the future. So if you could talk a little bit more about where this is leading Canada in terms of the geopolitical world and economic as well.
Absolutely, and there's two sides to this. There's the commercial side and there's the security side. And Joseph, we've worked on these issues for many, many years. I was at the Battle of Seattle protesting the World Trade Organization way back when. I've been at protests of the IMF and whatnot in the free trade area of the Americas in New York and also in Washington. And so those are the commercial side of things, and the defense sides have always been kept separate. But now they are being put together in a way that's quite alarming. So, for instance, Canada is now trying to negotiate some kind of new agreement with the United States that links commerce with security, which is very unusual. Long ago, after 9/11, we talked about building Fortress North America. That was a completely integrated defense structure with a free trade area in the middle. Lots of people protested about that, and that really kind of fell apart. But that was maybe one of the high points of the deep integration. Now, with this breakage that we've got, we do not have a trusted relationship with the U.S. has caused a huge problem and a relooking at everything. The Prime Minister is talking about reorienting our security away. We are not leaving NATO. Let's put it that way. Canada is deeply committed to NATO. Over this concerns of many people, myself as well, considering this is a nuclear armed alliance, and Canada sits on the nuclear planning group, if you can believe that. But the elites, the government is not looking at moving away from NATO. And in fact, they want to move maybe further into it. The US, by moving away from NATO, criticizing NATO, moving away from Europe in terms of its view on Ukraine, and Ukraine is the key focal point of this, of which a lot of other things are growing. Canada is now moving closer to Europe. Canada's been a longstanding supporter of Ukraine following the Russian invasion. We've sent billions of dollars of weapons there, financial contributions, same as the US, same as other European countries. And now we have joined what's been called the Coalition of the Willing. Now, I remember the first Coalition of the Willing, which was the invasion of Iraq, and Canada did not join that Coalition of the Willing. We are now joining a different Coalition of the Willing, Joseph, which is led by the UK and France and about 15 other countries to provide security guarantees to the Ukraine, continue fueling arms to try to make up the difference if the US backs out of that support. And should a ceasefire agreement be reached, the Coalition of the Willing would be prepared to offer security guarantees to Ukraine, not NATO membership, but security guarantees, including troops on the ground. So this would be peacekeepers. It was mentioned in the Canadian election that Canada would be part of that, which does set us on potentially a big collision course with Russia, with maybe even the United States, since the U.S. and Trump has been adopting the Russian view of the conflict more and more. Not to mention serious questions about what happens if the fighting starts out. What happens to these troops that are there? What is our commitment to that? Raises a whole series of questions, and as well from an economic standpoint, the loss of all these jobs, the Canadian government is trying to move into what you might call a military Keynesianism. You know, if they're for the economics nerds on the call, right? A sense that the government can intervene in the economy through spending and through protectionist measures and agreements to help bolster a domestic economy. And this is often done through defense spending. That is one of the big vehicles. Canada plans to increase its defense spending, almost doubling it to reach that 2% of NATO and maybe beyond, 2% of GDP, the NATO number, and beyond. That is, all parties have agreed on that, so that seems to be a done deal. But we actually had a minister on television yesterday, a minister for industry, saying, you know, we've lost, we have 3 shifts at this General Motors plant outside of Toronto. 1 shift is being laid off. Maybe they could make weapons. They don't have to make cars. So conversion is moving in the opposite direction. We used to talk about moving from defense industries, converting to civilian industries at the end of the Cold War. Now it's going back into the other direction, not building cars anymore, but building tanks or whatever. And the big market, if we can't trust the US anymore, Europe. Europe military spending is going gangbusters. The latest SIPRI report said that Europe's defense spending has gone up 17%. It's almost twice as much as the global average. Globally, it's gone up 9%. In Europe, it's going up twice as much. It's driven by Ukraine. It's driven by concern about Russia. It's driven by the withdrawal of the United States, possibly from NATO. And Canada is looking to try to cash in on it, if you can say, to try to get even a small portion of the amount of money that's being spent through the European Union. Over $1 trillion is expected to be put out in loans to help national governments boost defense spending in Europe. And now we could see Canada's sizable arms industry, not massive, but sizable for sure, grow even more by trying to supply the Europeans as they begin to rearm to support Ukraine, to keep the Russians out and to help build the cohesiveness of NATO.
So this is going to be interesting as if the Canadian-European marriage moves forward, and as the United States increasingly divorces itself from Europe. I mean, one of the other dimensions of all this at a, if you will, a deeper level, has to do with the kind of a division in the West at a really profound level. I mean, we're facing a major split in what has been the West, not just militarily or economically, but value-wise as well. And we're seeing the United States move in a what is the word for it? An absolutely retrograde and destructive direction. I turn now to some of the questions we've got. One from Moji Aga out in Boulder. Could Canada getting closer to the EU and even China benefit world peace?
Well, that's a great question. Could it benefit world peace? I mean, Canada has been traditionally a champion of the international rules-based order for good reason. We're little guys, so to speak, and the smaller players like to have an international rules-based order. We like to have lots of multilateral relationships. We've been a long supporter. I mean, we brought in the Landmines Treaty. It's famously called the Ottawa Treaty. We were early adopters of the International Criminal Court. There's been all kinds of international treaties. Our former foreign minister, Lloyd Axworthy, actually set up something called the G20, which was meant to get away from this G7, G8, to bring in countries like Brazil, like India, like China, which we now, and even Russia, which we call the BRICS now, the BRICS. It was about expanding this away from these singular power centers around the world to have a much more multilateral cooperative environment. So I think Canada would definitely be much more at home in Europe. I mean, we do have a very large part of our population that looks to France. In fact, this was very important for us not joining the US invasion of Iraq. It was because of public opinion in Quebec, which was largely informed because of the views of Europe, especially France at the time. So this has been important for us. On the other hand, though, we're not part of the European Union. I suspect that a lot of this money is meant for European countries. And frankly, Canadians were a little disappointed when the United States started talking about annexing Canada, and we didn't hear very much from Europe, including from the UK. Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, was down there, in the Oval Office with Trump, just really turning on the charm at this, and at the same time that we're getting hammered with calls for annexation here. And it was really a disconnect for us. Nevertheless, I think probably Canadians will rise above that and see that Europeans do have a very similar kind of commitment to internationalism and even social programs. We do have probably a lot in common with those countries, more so in some ways than we would with the U.S.
The question from, and I'm going to mess up the pronunciation of the last name, John Trevithick. He wants to know, what is Canadian peace movement's view toward ending the war in Ukraine, including Trump's mineral deal, which seems to me highly exploitative?
Well, I would say there's multiple views, Joseph, on Ukraine. And as we know, the any social movement is not completely hegemonic. There's different views on that. So there's the larger progressive left that you might say, and then you might say that the peace movement is generally one part of it. I think initially some of these criticisms that Russia was leveling, particularly around NATO expansion, resonated with the peace movement, because we had been arguing the exact same thing for many years, going back to the 1990s. I remember being in consultations with the Canadian government saying, look, this constant eastward push of NATO to gobble up these these former countries moving right up to the border is not a good move. It's not, but yet they continue to move in that direction. We were also not part of this triumphalism after the Cold War and the Soviet Union collapsed. That this was all going to be now capitalism uber alles. Many of us were in the streets protesting that kind of attitude, pushing more for internationalism, more social justice, more grassroots kind of approach. So those things, I think, resonated to some degree with parts of the peace movement. But I would say, though, for the larger left movement, it very much identifies this as a David and Goliath struggle, identifying with Ukraine, so much so that there's a unanimity across all the political parties, including the right, although a little bit left. So the center, which would be the Liberals, which are in power. We have what you might think of as a Labour Party here, and the NDP, and even a nascent Green Party. We even have a party in Quebec as well too that just looks at Quebec. But they were all unanimous in support for Ukraine, whether it be weapons, whether it be arms, whether it be bringing in refugees. This was a unanimous type thing, and it is seen as kind of an anti-imperialism kind of thing, of pushing back against Russian imperialism, violating international law in the Ukraine. So I'd say that's definitely where Canada seems to be now, and that's why they're moving more towards that European view, because that European view is shared by much of Canada as well.
Mm-hmm. As you're talking, I'm thinking about the need for those of us south of the border to be making the adjustments to, if you will, not taking Canada for granted anymore, right? And the need to appreciate that millions of people north of the border are moving in their own direction.
You're welcome here anytime.
Well, we may take you up on that, Stephen. Some of us may have to.
Well, as we were talking, many did during the Vietnam War. Another difference of opinion between Canada and the United States: we did not go into Vietnam with our troops, although we were happy to supply you with the weaponry. Mm-hmm. And we benefited a lot from a brain gain. Mm-hmm. Many wonderful American cousins who came and made their home here in the United States. Many went back, but a lot stayed, and it really had a very positive impact on our political culture here.
Yeah, well, we're beginning to experience another brain drain, and not only to Canada. I mean, Europeans and others are looking to pick up scientists and scholars and others who are having to bail. A question from Cheryl Spencer that you may not be able to answer, but we'll try it anyhow. Regarding the behavior of U.S. border guards, how do they get these orders to behave in this new way towards Canadians? Do they apologize that they've been told to do this, whereas in the past they were friendly?
Well, that's a great question. I have not crossed the border. I think there may be a difference between air crossings and land crossings. A lot of the problems have been at the land crossings. But let me just say this: is that I think the border guards take their cues. They take their cues from the government. They see themselves as being part of the same security apparatus. I'm sure they take their jobs very seriously. No doubt about that. I know our border guards take their jobs very seriously. I'm sure that American border guards take their jobs equally as seriously that they do there. But Canadians, in some ways, have become so accustomed to crossing the border completely unfettered. We almost forget that we don't have a right to cross the border. That it is within every state's right to put this on people. But it's so jarring for us to be experiencing things like, we're now being advised to take burner phones across the border. Now, I mean, I don't know if you ever watched Breaking Bad, that old TV series, but I never, or Call Saul, Better Call Saul. I never knew what a burner phone was until I watched these crime shows, and they're untraceable, one-use, low-cost, usually used by criminals to do their business. So leave your iPhone at home because it can be seized, and they have every right to demand your password to get into the phone. So I think the border guards are taking their cues from the government, and they are going over the top. But some of these questions, like this is what happens, Joseph. You get these kind of policies that happen way up here, but by the time they filter down to the reality of life on the ground and people that are of a certain mindset that are trying, it gets ugly. It can get really ugly and start not resembling in any way what the original policy was about. And so that's what I think that's really concerning.
Yeah, I mean, we've even seen U.S. citizens, right, caught up by ICE. The
Find themselves in El Salvador.
a combination of authoritarian institutions and people with authoritarian mindsets. Not a pretty combination. Let's see what we've got here. Quanta Dawn Light asks, would Canada use the current situation as an opportunity to sign the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons at the UN General Assembly? Should Canadians strongly encourage their government to do so?
Well, what a lovely idea that would be. That would be some comfort, at least. As you know, Canada's been sadly absent on the Nuclear Ban Treaty and the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The last Prime Minister was very dismissive of it. They very much adopt the NATO view, I think, and we've been at least trying, many people have been trying to get Canada to at least participate as an observer at some of these review conferences at the UN. I mean, sadly, one would hope that an independent foreign policy that was disintegrated from such the influence of the US would become more progressive. I'm hopeful that that might happen. I'm not really convinced that it is. I mean, ironically, defense spending support has gone up in Canada because I think of what's been happening, because the Canadians say, well, we need to defend ourselves. And where do they turn to? They turn to the military. So it seems that no matter what happens, arguments for increased defense spending in Canada always seems to go in one direction. So whether we're close with the United States and we need to maintain that good relationship, therefore we must spend more on defense. The other argument goes, well, we want to distance ourselves from the United States. We need to stand on our own 2 feet. Therefore, we need to spend more on defense. Both arguments seem to end up in the same spot, and I'm really hoping that a wiser view would be, hey, that's not our future. Our future is working with other countries, supporting the United Nations, promoting international cooperation, and creating a web of allies to rein in these movements, as you were describing, that we're seeing this increased polarization. I hope that's the case. We've not seen any sign of it yet.
Just to add, I mean, the future of NATO is very much unclear, right? And the discussions of the creation of a more independent European military going on, and you have to see how, among others, Trump plays this out. But there's also the reality that as the Europeans have less confidence in the U.S. deterrent nuclear umbrella. Not that it's a particularly, I had a Japanese friend who used to open up a holy umbrella to illustrate what it really is. But you have the discussions going on, supported by Poland, among others, that the French and British nuclear arsenals should serve as the new nuclear umbrella for Europe. And Canada being, on the one hand, part of NATO, and on the other, part of this growing connection with Europe. The pressures on the Canadian movement to push for de-nuclear and TPNW policies are more of a challenge, I think. And maybe the last question here, there's a couple of them, from Sally Jones. Will Canada be open to citizens or undocumented residents from the U.S. finding sanctuary in Canada? And I guess I would break this down a little bit. On the one hand, we have many immigrant refugees here, so many of whom are not documented, and some as we can. I mean, the fear among the immigrant community here is huge, and we can read that some are trying to get to Canada. On the other hand, there are people here in our peace and justice movements who are concerned, fearful of what will come down in the Trump repression, and are wondering if they're going to need to flee to Canada or somewhere else, and wondering if they would be welcome as well. So your thoughts on this?
Well, it's a great question. Canada has a long history of accepting refugees, asylum seekers from around the world. We talked about Vietnam War. We took many people in from Vietnam after the Vietnam War. They were called the boat people, and they came in the thousands to Canada. From Latin America, from whole communities from Chile following the 1973 coup came to Canada. In fact, even before that, Ukrainian populations, Russian populations, all through Canada, all came from various repression and intolerance, and came to Canada. And we are a nation of people from elsewhere, sitting on top of Indigenous land, I might recognize. But we have traditionally been a refuge. I mean, you can go back to the Underground Railroad. Canada used to be the end of the Underground Railroad. That's where slaves were trying to escape to. But let's bring it a little more current. In recent times, we took in thousands of Syrian refugees in 2015, 2016, and Canadians were very proud of that we were taking in so many refugees from that conflict. People opened their homes. We were helped. We had families who were able to sponsor other families to come that we didn't even know. So it wasn't just a government program. It was actually community to community, family to family that was doing this. And of course, we've had a lot of people come across the border at uncontrolled, what they call, I think it's called unregulated, uncontrolled crossings in Quebec, in the West as well too. People that are coming here. The numbers are going to go down though. The latest government has already indicated they're going to reduce immigration levels here in Canada. It's not so much in a nod to what's happening in the U.S. And it's not so much a part of a xenophobia so much, not an overt one that we can really tell. They're using economic arguments about pressures on housing, pressures on healthcare, all of which I don't think is really founded in fact. But we are going to, I think, see a more restrictive approach to immigration. I know in my day job on healthcare, part of my work is making sure that people who have non-status or who find themselves without status. We have so many international students. We begged international students to come to Canada because we made a fortune off them in our universities, and we promised them a pathway to citizenship. That's been closed. The rug's been pulled out from under them on that, and now they're losing citizenship, and they're desperately trying to claim whatever lever they can to stay in Canada. It's a terrible situation, and we need to make sure that they have access to healthcare and other services too. So I think that's where we stand on that issue right now. It's Canadian public is still open to it, but the window is closing on it.
The two thoughts on that. I mean, one, with 1 million people facing possible unemployment, one could imagine that would add to anti-immigrant pressures, as it has here. And on the other, simply to say this is an area where we're going to need to stay very closely in touch as things develop and share information back and forth.
You
I
bet.
think there was one more question here. Yeah, since, again, from Quanta Dawn Light, since Canada, USA, and the EU are selling arms to war-torn Ukraine, and Trump's efforts to stop the war, gaining opposition to him, driven by military-industrial complex, a little bit confusing here. I guess the question has to do with where do you see the drive in terms of arms sales to Ukraine going? I mean, we have a big day coming up tomorrow in Istanbul. Where you see this relationship going?
I don't think that Canadians are fully aware of the horrors that are happening in Ukraine in that conflict. And I write about this regularly in my Substack piece called Peace Quest to talk about what's been happening at that border. I mean, Trump's not wrong on the massive bloodshed and massive number of casualties that are being incurred on a daily basis there, just to move in World War I style trench warfare, where the border barely moves and 1,000 people are killed a day over a hill or a tree line. So that's one area where I don't disagree. We need to find that fighting. We need to end that fighting. Now, where can the peace agreement come from? How can we? What is going to be the prospect of returning captured territory from Russia back to Ukraine? Is that going to be a non-starter? What are the terms of this ceasefire going to be? It's going to be very hard to say. What is the European view going to be, since it has been so strongly behind Ukraine on this? Are they willing to come together on an agreement? Will Ukraine themselves agree to the terms? I'm not really sure. But in the meanwhile, Canada and Europe is committed to continuing with the level of arms transfers that Ukraine is absolutely dependent on. I mean, 5,000 shells a day they fire there. They got to keep those factories rolling. And now we're going to have commercial interests involved, massive. Canada is now looking at, ironically, the supply route to Europe and by extension Ukraine as being part of our economic recovery from Trump's tariffs.
Mhm.
Figure that out. So peace in Ukraine, what does that mean? Does that mean loss of employment opportunities in Canada? That is a spot you do not want to be in. This is why we never want to link foreign policy and security policy to commercial and trade. They should never be together, because when you link them, and we know those linkages are always obvious, they're always underneath, but it's not a good place to be in.
Stephen, thank you so much for this last hour. You're sharing your passion, your knowledge. I find myself thinking that I don't back annexation, but it's sort of a shame that your family ended up in Canada, because it would have been wonderful to have you as a leader of our peace movement down here south of the border. So just to thank you for that. And before signing off here, I want to call participants' attention to the fact that we'll be doing a webinar on the 20th next week. I guess that's on the Monday, no, the Tuesday, with Tuesday the 20th with Richard Sakwa, who's a brilliant scholar and an analyst of Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasian political and military dynamics. That'll be at 1 o'clock, and I'd encourage people to listen in, maybe also to find a copy of his book, The Culture of the Second Cold War. And with that, Stephen, I want to thank you again. A very rich session, and I'm looking forward to being able to share it and to get it out to a much larger audience. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joseph. Thanks, everyone.